Hello, I'm Paul Mayoral. I want to discuss penalty enforcement on the National Federation football rules. Traditionally, the 3-and-1 or basic enforcement spot philosophy was used throughout Federation, covered about 90% of the plays you need. Under the major revisions of the last few years, obviously it's not as used as much, but it's still the background or default for penalty enforcement. What it means is there are four possible places on the field that a foul could occur: by the defense beyond the spot, by the defense behind the spot, by the offense beyond the spot, or by the offense behind the spot. Of those four possible locations, three of them are going to be marked from the basic spot. One of them will be from the spot of the foul. By defining basic spot or 3-and-1, the rule makers don't have to keep repeating the concept of 3-and-1. They can just give a general spot, and you have to understand when 3-and-1 applies. However, 3-and-1 does not always apply, so let's start covering when it does. You'll notice that for a loose ball play, 3-and-1 doesn't really apply anymore as to the general rule. Everything's from previous spot except for a few exceptions that we have to go over. This doesn't look like 3-and-1, and obviously it's a little bit different from it. The first thing we have to understand is just what is a loose ball play. On free kicks, it's simple. It's the interval during the kick. Once the kick is ended, a return has begun and the loose ball play is over. On scrimmage plays, fouls during the snap or until the last loose ball that occurs in or behind the neutral zone is over, they're all loose ball. Also, although it's not in the definition itself, when you read the whole rule together in context, a sack play or when the play ends for a loss of yardage, this is effectively treated as a loose ball play. Since all football plays start as a loose ball play, it's just a question of determining how long the loose play interval lasts. Also remember, do not call a loose ball that occurs beyond the neutral zone a loose ball play, because it's not. For example, the runner advances for a 2-yard gain, then he fumbles. We need to beanbag that spot. If the ball stays beyond the line, this is a running play thereafter and not a loose ball play any longer. Thus remember, when a loose ball play does occur, for example, an incomplete forward pass play, the entire down would be loose ball play. When the quarterback is sacked behind the line of scrimmage, the entire play would be treated as though a loose ball play. And all your enforcements are at the previous spot, barring one of the exceptions. So let's cover what are the exceptions. By Team A, behind the line of scrimmage, there are three. Illegal batting or kicking of a loose ball, I put them in the same category because they have a 10-yard penalty, same enforcement. Illegal forward pass, including grounding or a second forward pass, they all have a 5-yard loss of down from the spot of the pass. Also, any Team A foul in A's end zone, that would be a safety, in effect, at the spot of the foul. So when one of these exceptions applies, that starts to look a lot more like the 3-and-1 of old. You're going to enforce everything from the previous spot, but one of the exceptions that occurs behind the previous spot would be marked from the spot of the foul. So if you had, for example, intentional grounding, you're going to be 5 yards from the spot of the foul and loss of down. Or if there's a ball bouncing around and it's illegally kicked or batted by Team A behind the line, that'd be a 10-yard penalty, repeat the down from the spot of the foul. As for roughing the passer, that's an exception on defense. Since this is a foul that occurs during a loose ball play, normal enforcement would be previous spot. But for roughing the passer, they've determined it's equitable to have a tack-on exception where we're going to have a special enforcement just for this roughing the passer foul. To have the tack-on, you have to have a completed pass to Team A. There has to be no change of possession resulting from the play action, and there's a net gain on the play for Team A. If all three are met, then you tack on or enforce from the end of the last run. If one of them is missing, you don't apply the exception and you go back to loose ball play, previous spot. We have a situation where a receiver is a defenseless player. When any potential Team A receiver is a defenseless player and is illegally roughed, contacted by the defense in violation of that rule, the penalty yardage may be tacked on in the same manner and under the same circumstances as roughing the passer. See Casebook Plate 9.4.3YB. However, this is not an automatic first down. Therefore, since the foul occurs on a loose ball play with normally previous spot enforcement, a tack-on exception is added provided the same three elements are met. The pass has got to be complete to someone on Team A, no change of possession results from the play action, and there is a net gain for A on the play. If all three are met, then we're going to tack on or enforce from the end of the last run. We've been talking about loose ball play, but also there's a running play. That's the second major type of enforcement. When there's a run for a 20-yard gain and a tackle downfield, then we're going to apply the old 3-and-1 basically from the end of the run. Fouls by the defense would be tacked on to the end of the run. Foul by the offense beyond the end of the run would be from the end of the run as well. However, a Team A foul behind that spot but beyond the line of scrimmage would be a spot foul, as shown by the arrow indicating the spot of the foul. And no matter how long the run is, there's a foul by A other than one of the three exceptions, and that A foul is way back behind the previous spot. That would now be previous spot enforcement. It's very common to have a pass play, completion, and then a run. Then we must determine, did the foul happen during the loose ball play with the previous spot being the basic spot, or did it occur after the pass completion where we're going to tack it on 3-and-1 from the end of the run? Having gone through all the importance of knowing loose ball play versus running play and when the foul occurs in which of those situations, we have to bring you back to one situation where these things don't matter. A foul simultaneous with the snap, we're always going to enforce from the previous spot or decline the penalty, regardless of which type of play follows the snap. Then you're going to use previous spot for fouls simultaneous with the snap. Of course, we also have a special rule for fouls occurring by the defense during a touchdown, successful try, or field goal. Let's talk for a moment about fouls during their return run. B is intercepted, they're running back. So B is now on offense. Or R is returning the kick. Their R is now on offense. That's the traditional 3-and-1. The original offense in this example was going from bottom to top, but once B intercepts or R is returning, now they're heading in the opposite direction. So Team B or Team R in this example would be on offense. The foul is behind the end of the run. It's a spot foul under the original basic enforcement spot. Most officials do not have a problem with the 3-and-1 on a return run. The question comes up, however, on those rare cases where the return run results in a touchback. B intercepts several yards deep in the end zone, starts to run and decides, no, I'm just going to down it in the end zone or get tackled in the end zone. Similarly, B intercepts at the 3-yard line. The beanbag is marking the momentum spot. He's carried into the end zone by his own momentum and goes down there. Then you have a momentum situation. Where you have a touchback run or a momentum run, you treat it as though the run ended at the 20 in the case of a touchback or at the beanbag in the case of a momentum play. In a safety run, if I've intercepted and for some reason made an end run through my own end zone where the momentum rule does not apply, then we're going to penalize from the goal line in that situation. For example, B intercepts at the 6-yard line, pauses, decides he's going to make an end run through his own end zone, and 3 yards deep in the end zone, they tackled me by my face mask. We're going to go from the goal line 15 yards out. It would have been a safety, but we're going to penalize from the goal line under that circumstance. Similarly, I intercept deep in the end zone. They grab me by the face mask and pull me down. Okay, that would have been a touchback. We're going to go now after the enforcement of the penalty from the 20 to the 35-yard line. I intercept at the 3-yard line. My momentum carries me in where I'm tackled by the face mask. We're going to go 3-and-1 from the momentum spot. So if we intercept it at the 3, we're going to wind up at the 18-yard line. Post-scrimmage kick penalty enforcement is one of the kicking game exceptions. It's one of the major exceptions. And of course, it's designed to be equitable and rather than go back to the previous spot for a foul by R way downfield. For post-scrimmage kick to apply, these are R fouls only. We're not talking about fouls by K, and they cannot happen on a try. The post-scrimmage kick must meet 5 conditions. As said before, it must be a foul by R. The foul is generally on our side of the expanded neutral zone, more than 2 yards downfield, but we'll talk more about this. A foul is after the snap but before the kick ends. The kick must cross the neutral zone at some point, and R must be entitled to possession at the end of the down. If all 5 of these conditions are met, then we enforce from the spot where the kick ends, or if R's foul is further back than that spot, then we have to enforce from the spot of the foul. That's why we have to have a beanbag down to mark the spot where a return begins and the kick ends. So if the punt is caught at the 17-yard line, then we have a beanbag at the 17, and we apply post-scrimmage kick fouls from the 17 unless the foul occurs further back, then it would be a spot foul. The situation also requires that the foul to be post-scrimmage kick has to be on our side of the expanded neutral zone. For example, if the gunners, that is to say the people in the wide receiver position, they're going to shoot downfield on punt plays to basically act as defenders and returning of the punt. Well, if they're fouled by a block below the waist, a grab into the face mask, or some personal foul at the line of scrimmage, that's not post-scrimmage kick. That's going to be previous spot under a loose ball play. On the other hand, if the gunner is wrapped up with an illegal use of the hands or a hold, we don't have to be too picky about the 2 yards because that's related to the return. If it's obviously at the line of scrimmage, okay, it's previous spot. But if it's somewhere in that gray area, we're going to treat it as a post-scrimmage kick foul. That is not a personal foul, where it would, if there we'd have to be picky about that it has to be at least 2 yards, more than 2 yards downfield. Those are the conditions for post-scrimmage kick. We apply the 20-yard line for kicks in the end zone if it's a touchback, so that if there's an R foul on a touchback kick, then we're going to enforce from the 20 unless the foul is further back than the 20, then it would be a spot foul. Kick catch interference is another exception to the general rule of previous spot for a loose ball play. If R is called or fouled with a situation that constitutes kick catch interference, R, remember, has the right to the ball, the primary right on a kick. So K may not interfere with R's path to the ball, nor if R is pursuing the ball, may K even touch a free or scrimmage kick in flight. So if, for example, K were to jump up and catch the kick right before R got to it, that would be an example of kick catch interference. Kick catch interference exception says that R has a right to take an awarded fair catch at the spot plus 15 yards. It's not the only option, however, because it is a loose ball play. We have to remember that R can accept the penalty at the previous spot. So if that's the case, then we can enforce 15 at the previous spot and replay what is normally a 4th down, I would imagine, on a scrimmage play. So if the K has gotten off a really terrific kick and then R is interfered with, R may well prefer the previous spot to replay rather than the awarded fair catch plus 15. We've got to remember to give that option to the coach on a really good kick. A third exception to loose ball play on kicks is any foul by K when R is left in possession at the end of the down. In this case, R may tack on at the end of the play, or they could accept the standard enforcement if they prefer. This applies on all kicks, free or scrimmage kicks. A good example would be an illegal formation in punt formation, and the kick is returned by R for pretty good yardage. They're going to want that return, but they're also going to get the 5-yard penalty tacked on. In other cases where it's a good deep kick and they don't get a good return, they may prefer to go back with the previous spot enforcement and then have them hopefully re-kick. Some basic doctrines have to be discussed, that any penalty may be declined. You have offsetting penalties and you have multiple fouls. Any distance penalty may be declined. So coaches often have to be told this option because there are situations where declination may be better. Another concept is the double foul. When each team fouls, a live ball foul by each team, the penalty is offset and the down is replayed unless the clean hands rule applies. The clean hands rule applies if there's a change of possession during the down and the team in possession at the end of the down had not fouled prior to the last possession. That team may then decline their opponent's penalty or penalties and keep the ball after their own penalty is enforced. There's also the concept of the post-scrimmage kick clean hands rule. If R's foul is post-scrimmage kick, then R may decline any K penalties and keep the ball after enforcement of their own foul. Often, though, they may want to just go ahead and replay the down and accept the other penalty. Another concept is multiple fouls. Multiple fouls are live ball fouls by the same team. The opponent must choose only one, can't just tack on multiple fouls. You have to pick one or the other. The half the distance rule is also a factor that must be considered. No penalty may exceed half the distance from the enforcement spot towards the goal line. Also, there are very few automatic first downs in Federation football. In fact, no penalty carries an automatic first down other than roughing the specialist, and the specialists are the passer, kicker, holder, or deep snapper in scrimmage kick formation. So if you have roughing the passer, for example, that would be an automatic first down. But just a general personal foul would not be an automatic first down. We have to consider also how to handle dead ball fouls. They're all at the succeeding spots, but you do not pair a live ball foul with a dead ball foul. You penalize separately in the order of occurrence. If in the dead ball interval there are multiple 15-yarders by each team, then before we mark them off, they cancel on equal numbers. A slugs B, B slugs A. They're ejected, of course, but the yardage just cancels. If before the first ready on the try, then there's an option to enforce dead ball fouls on either the try or the succeeding kickoff. Live ball fouls that are treated as dead ball fouls are unsportsmanlike, non-contact fouls, or non-player fouls having no bearing on the play. So, for example, the current example of A about to score a touchdown, the runner is scoring, and he uses an obscene gesture or otherwise insults the opponent just as he's about to score, the touchdown would count, and we would penalize as a dead ball foul at either the try or subsequent kickoff. Similarly, a non-player foul that has no bearing on the play, team's done poorly all year, they finally break off the long touchdown run, and behind the action, the team spills out onto the field cheering and yelling, but it had no bearing on the play. If we have to enforce that, it's going to be enforced as a dead ball foul because it had no bearing on the play. Carryover fouls are fouls by the defense on a TD or a field goal. Okay, a successful try would also have to be considered, the option on a field goal as well. You can not skip it down, however, into overtime or the next overtime series, since the succeeding spot is a subsequent kickoff. There are no kickoffs in overtime. So if we have a score at the end of the last time down of the fourth period, and the extra point would make it a tie, and does make it a tie, that could be carried over to overtime because you're not skipping it down. On the other hand, if the touchdown itself is what ties the game, you can't skip the try into overtime. So that's the difference, that you cannot skip it down into overtime or the next overtime. Otherwise, fouls on a touchdown by defense can skip the try if so elected and go to the succeeding kickoff. I hope this has been helpful on penalty enforcement.